In the winter of 1938, a crew in the salt mine under Hutchinson in Reno County, Kansas, was driving another entry on the 650-foot level, room and pillar. Undercut the base of the face, drill the holes, load, shoot, and the broken salt goes onto the belt. The salt here runs as one continuous bed, Permian, lying almost flat, and a face in it is so uniform that a driller can work a whole shift and meet nothing but salt. The mine is indecently dry. There is effectively no moisture in it, so nothing underground rusts, rots, or moulds. And for that same reason, almost nothing was ever sent back up. Hoisting cost money, and it ran one way, so a broken handle, a torn glove, a paper lunch sack were dropped where they gave out. In the worked-out rooms, there are still newspapers and tin cans from the 30s lying as though somebody set them down last month. That shift they shot the face the way they always did, waited for the dust to settle, and walked in. The salt had not come away the way salt comes away. Behind the fallen mass there was no rock. There was a plain, flat, vertical, running true, coursed. Blocks lay in rows, with the joints offset, dressed to one another without mortar, what a mason would call a proper bond, and what a miner would call nothing at all, because his trade has no word for it. The wall ran out past the lamplight in both directions. The shift boss went up, reported it, and by the end of that day the heading was timbered and sealed. An entry went into the book, one line, standard wording, the category mining uses for anything that came down on its own. Roof fall. No photographs were made because nobody underground carried a camera and there was no reason to. No samples were taken because you take a sample of something that counts as rock. The state's mine reporting for that year has a column for injuries, a column for falls of ground, and a column for tonnage. And there is no column anywhere on the sheet into which a man can write a wall. And now the only part of this that actually matters, and it is not the masonry, it is the salt above it. I will tell you exactly when that salt was laid down, in Block 7. For now, hold two things: 650 feet, and the word they put in the book instead of everything else. Salt does not form the way rock forms. Rock is heat and pressure and time. Salt is what is left when water goes away. To lay down a bed of it, you need a shallow arm of a sea, cut off or nearly cut off from the open ocean, in a climate hot and dry enough that evaporation beats every river running into it. The water goes up, the dissolved solids stay, the brine gets denser and denser, and eventually the salt comes out of solution and settles as crystal on the floor of what is left. Then the sea comes back a little, the process repeats, and it repeats, and it repeats. What is under Kansas is the Hutchinson salt member, and it is the residue of that cycle running for a very long time across a very large area, a bed hundreds of feet thick in places, lying nearly level, underlying something on the order of 37,000 square miles of central Kansas and running on into Oklahoma. 37,000 square miles. That is not a deposit, that is a floor, and the towns on top of it have no idea they are standing on the same slab as the towns 100 miles away. That is what the shaft at Hutchinson goes down through and what the headings run in. Now the part that makes this a story rather than a geology lecture. A bed of salt is not a permanent object, it is soluble. Push fresh water against it and it goes into solution and vanishes, and when it vanishes, the ground overhead has nothing to stand on and it comes down. Where that has happened, you find the evidence immediately and you cannot miss it. Collapsed breccia, jumbled blocks, sinkholes at surface, brine in the workings. Where it has not happened, the bed sits exactly as it settled, in flat, undisturbed courses, and it stays dry. Salt also moves, slowly, under load. The rooms cut into it close in on themselves over decades, at a rate you can measure but not see, which means a mine in salt is a structure with a working life, not a permanent hole. Hutchinson is dry. That is the whole argument in one word, and everything in this video runs on it, so subscribe now, because the next thing you need to understand is what a place that dry does to anything left inside it. 650 feet under Hutchinson, the temperature holds at about 68 degrees, and the relative humidity sits near 40%, and neither of those numbers moves. Not in August, not in January, not in a drought, and not in a flood year. There is no weather down there, because weather is water, and there is no water. What that does to objects is difficult to overstate. Iron does not rust, because rust needs moisture. Paper does not foxes or yellow the way it does in an attic. Leather stays supple. Wood does not check or split. Cloth does not rot. Mould does not grow, and the bacterial life that breaks down organic material on the surface simply has nothing to work with. The mine has been running since the early 1920s, and the working culture in it never changed. Whatever was finished with went on the floor, because sending it up was pointless expense. So the abandoned rooms filled with the ordinary refuse of ordinary shifts, and none of it ever went anywhere. Newspapers with the date still legible, tobacco tins, lunch sacks, rubber boots, a hat on a ledge where a man left it and forgot it, and the industry that grew out of this is not folklore. It is a business. Since the late 1950s, there has been a commercial storage operation inside that mine, holding corporate records and film, and the master material of a great many motion pictures is sitting under Kansas right now, because there is no place on the surface that keeps things better. Among it, by a coincidence too neat to invent, there is material from a film about a Kansas girl and a storm. Now put that fact against a heading sealed in 1938. Whatever the crew looked at that day did not decay, did not corrode, and did not collapse. It is still there. It has been there for 87 years, in a room with the timbers still standing, in air that does not change, and every single thing about it that could be tested is still testable today. Here is where I have to slow this down and give you the ordinary explanation, because it is a good one and it deserves to go early rather than be buried at the end as a formality. Halite, rock salt, has perfect cubic cleavage. Its atoms are arranged in a cube, and it splits along 3 planes set at exactly 90 degrees to one another. Hit a lump of it, and you do not get a shapeless fragment, you get a smaller box. That is not an unusual property, it is the defining property, and it means salt is the one common mineral on Earth that manufactures right angles as a matter of routine. Now add the second thing. The Hutchinson bed is not pure halite from top to bottom. Running through it are thin partings, layers of shale and anhydrite left behind between the flooding cycles, and those partings are horizontal, regular, and spaced. They are also weaker than the salt around them. So a bedded salt face has horizontal planes of weakness from the partings and vertical planes of weakness from the crystal structure, and when you set a charge against it, it will break along both. What comes out can be a face of stacked rectangular blocks with level joints and offset ends, which is to say a face that looks exactly like coursed masonry, because the same geometry is producing it. That is the sober answer: cleavage plus bedding plus a blast. I want to be clear that I think it is probably the right one, but notice what it is not. It is not an answer, it is a candidate, and there is exactly one way to separate a candidate from an answer. You take a piece off the face, you cut it thin enough to see light through, you put it under a microscope and you look at one thing: whether the salt crystals run continuously across the joint or stop dead against it. Continuous crystals mean the joint is a fracture and the block grew as part of the block beside it. Crystals that terminate mean two separate pieces were put together. There is no third result, and no judgment call in it. That test existed in 1938. It was routine, cheap, and available in every geology department in the state. And it was never done, because of what somebody wrote in the book. I want to defend the shift boss for a moment, because the interesting part of this story is not that a man lied. He did not lie. He picked a category. A working mine runs on standardized reporting, and the categories exist because insurance, state inspection, and litigation all need the same words used the same way. Ground comes down. That is a fall. A fall gets logged with a location, a date, an approximate tonnage, and whether anyone was hurt, and then the heading is secured and production moves on. Now consider what the alternative was. There is no reporting category for an anomalous structure encountered at a working face, because in the entire history of mining, nobody ever needed one. To report it as anything other than a fall, he would have had to invent a form, escalate it above the mine, and hold a face out of production while somebody from somewhere came to look at it. In 1938, in Kansas. 6 years into a drought that had physically stripped the topsoil off that part of the state and blown it east, in an economy where a working salt mine with a payroll was one of the very few things in that county still functioning. The dust storms had been rolling across the state for 6 years by then, and the worst single day of them, the one people still name, had come and gone 3 springs earlier. A sealed heading cost 1 shift, an investigation cost a season, and the man who caused it would have been the man who filled in the wrong box. So the entry went in as a fall of ground, and it was, in the only sense the paperwork recognized. Material came down that was not supposed to. This is the mechanism I keep running into, and it is far more effective than any conspiracy because it needs no participants. Nobody suppresses anything. The form has 4 boxes. The thing in front of you is not any of them, and you tick the nearest one and go back to work. And the record that comes out the other end is not falsified. It is worse than falsified. It is accurate, complete, and empty. Everything now depends on holding 2 timescales in your head at once, and they do not sit comfortably together. Here is the first. People have been in Kansas a long time. The oldest securely dated material on the Central Plains runs back to the end of the last ice age, on the order of 13,000 years, and the record from there forward is continuous and rich. Points, hearths, bison kills, quarry sites where stone was worked for millennia, and later the earth lodges and the villages that were standing when the first Europeans came up the rivers. 13,000 years is not a small number. It covers the whole of agriculture, the whole of writing, every city and every empire the human species has produced, twice over and then some. Now the second calendar. The salt bed above that sealed heading did not form in the Ice Age. It did not form when there were plains or grass or bison or rivers running east. It formed when Kansas was the floor of a shallow evaporating sea in the interior of a single supercontinent, in a world with no flowering plants, no birds, and no mammals of any kind. It formed before the largest extinction event in the history of life on this planet, not after it, before it. That event, when it came, removed something close to 9/10 of everything living in the sea, and it came after this salt was already lying here. So the sequence runs: the salt settles, the world ends, the world starts again, and then the dinosaurs appeared and ruled for 160 million years and were wiped out, and the mammals radiated, and the primates split off, and everything in the first calendar, every point, every hearth, every village, every city on earth, happened inside the last fraction of a % of the time that has passed since. those two numbers cannot both be true about the same wall. And in block 7, I'm going to give you the second one, exactly. Because until you have the actual figure in front of you, the problem is abstract. And it is not abstract at all. 275 million years. That is the age of the salt over that heading, not the age of the mine, not the age of the shaft, not the age of the rock somewhere in the general vicinity, the depositional age of the Hutchinson salt member itself, established by standard stratigraphy and correlated across the basin, and it is not a fringe figure or a contested one. It is in every geological survey publication that touches this part of the state. So now hold it against the other calendar, 13,000 years of people in Kansas. 275 million years of salt on top of them. The salt is roughly 21,000 times older than the entire human presence on the continent. If you compress the whole of that salt bed's existence into a single calendar year, the first human being would walk into Kansas at about 25 minutes to midnight on the 31st of December, and the crew would shoot that face about a second and a half before the bells. That is the scale of the thing. Not old, not very old, a different order of quantity, in which the entire human story is a rounding error, and the salt does not notice it happening. And this is the point where I stop being coy, because the honest reading of that number is not that something extraordinary is buried under Kansas. The honest reading is that the number rules the wall out. Nothing that builds walls existed. Nothing with hands existed. The proposition is not unlikely, it is impossible, and I am not going to pretend otherwise to keep you watching. Which leaves exactly two doors. Either the thing in that heading was never a wall, and block 4 gave you a very good mechanism for how salt makes something that looks like one, or the salt above it is not what it appears to be, and the seal has been broken, and the second door is not hypothetical, because the seal over Hutchinson has been broken thousands of times, and on one morning in 2001 it killed people in the street. Salt is not only mined by digging, it is also mined by dissolving it, and that is older and cheaper. You drill a well down to the bed, pump fresh water in, and pump saturated brine back out. What you sell is the brine. What you leave behind is a void of unknown shape in the salt, which nobody has seen, nobody has surveyed, and nobody is required to map. Kansas has been doing this since the 1880s. The wells number in the thousands, many of them drilled before anyone regulated the practice, plugged badly or not plugged at all, and abandoned by companies that no longer exist. Above and around a mine that everyone describes as sealed, the ground has been perforated like a colander for 140 years. On the 17th of January 2001, that fact arrived downtown. Natural gas held under pressure in an artificial cavern in the salt at a storage field some 7 miles northwest of Hutchinson escaped through a failure in a well and did not stay put. It travelled underground along the bed for miles, found old boreholes and came up through them inside the city. It blew out a downtown business premises in the middle of the afternoon. Then geysers of gas and brine began coming up out of the ground in a line across town, burning where they surfaced, in streets and yards and vacant lots, and the city started evacuating. The following day it reached a mobile home park, and 2 people were killed. That is not folklore, and it is not archived obscurity. It is a modern industrial disaster with an official investigation, a public findings report, and a town that had to be evacuated. And what it proved, at a cost, is that the salt over Hutchinson is not a lid. It is a lid with several thousand holes drilled through it, some of them charted and some of them not. Which changes the question in this whole video, and changes it in the direction of a real answer rather than away from one. The seal argument is dead. Good, because a seal cannot be tested and a piece of salt can. So let me be straight, because this is where I stop narrating. I cannot show you the 1938 entry. That heading was timbered and sealed on the day. The log line says fall of ground, and everything past that line is what men said afterwards, which is the weakest evidence there is. If somebody tells you a wall is down there and offers you certainty, walk away from them. But look at what this particular story has that almost no story of its kind ever has. The site is not lost. It is not underwater. It is not on private land in another country, and it has not been built over. That mine is still working, and part of it has been open to the public for years. You can buy a ticket in Hutchinson, ride a hoist 650 feet into Permian salt, and stand in rooms cut in the 20s and 30s, with the tools and the newspapers still lying where the crews dropped them. The 1938 workings are on the mine's own maps, because mine maps are kept, filed, and required by law. A working mine that cannot say where its own voids are is a mine that kills people. So the plans exist, and they exist for every year. The state's inspection reports are public records, and the test that separates a cleavage face from masonry is a hand sample, a thin section and an afternoon, which is less than what a university spends on a single undergraduate lab. Everything is in place. The rock is dry, the room is standing, the air has not changed since Roosevelt's second term, and whatever is in there is in exactly the condition it was in when a man decided which box to tick. Nobody has gone and looked, and the reason is not that anyone is hiding anything. Nobody is. The reason is that the log already says what it is, and a written answer, however thin, stops the question dead in a way that no absence of evidence ever could. That is the whole trick. Write the ordinary word on the ordinary line, and the thing stops being a question for 87 years.